tell about what happens when you try and research terrorism. You're going to tell a story?
To see how long do I have?
You've got 8 to 10 minutes.
8 to 10 minutes, okay. Sorry for coming in and disturbing your talk, Mozam. I really should have waited at the door. Maybe you can punish me through waterboarding or something. Bad joke. Well, it's all right. We academics have a tendency to stand at this podium and make really bad jokes anyway. But listen, I don't have long, so I'm going to crack straight on with it. I'm here to speak in two capacities. One is as somebody who has been researching and trying to examine counterterrorism policy and practice for around 8 years. And the reason why I've been looking at counterterrorism policy and practice for 8 years, what the motivation of my research and scholarship has been up until now, has been because of a false arrest and imprisonment for 7 days as a suspected terrorist when I was a postgraduate master's student at the University of Nottingham in 2008. Some of you may know this case. It became known in the media as the Nottingham 2. It was codenamed Operation Minerva, Minerva being the Greek goddess of wisdom. As somebody on the receiving end of that operation, I can assure you there was very little wisdom involved in that operation. So the reason why I was detained was because I had in my possession a document that you can obtain via interlibrary loan for £1. You can download for free, as I did, from the United States Department of Justice website for my research looking at Al-Qaeda and Hamas. Or you can, of course, buy it from W.H. Smith's or Blackwell's or Blackstone's for £19.95. Point being is, this document was declared by the Court of Appeal in 2008, I think it was in the beginning of 2008, to not be a document that is of use to terrorism. Okay, and for that reason it becomes a legitimate legal document. I was in possession of it, like I said, for my research. Then what happened is that this document was detected on a friend and a colleague of mine who was a member of staff in the university, who was helping me with my drafting up a PhD proposal looking at political Islam. And he was off ill one day, and an administrative member of staff found this document and referred the find, along with 2 other journal articles, one from the very radical Foreign Affairs, the one that gave us Clash of Civilizations by Huntington. Very radical indeed, in its stupidity, I should add, but referred this document to the university management, and once the university management had saw a document entitled the Al-Qaeda Training Manual, all sorts of alarm bells started ringing for obvious reasons, right? So what do? Without looking into all the internal procedures that should be followed, without looking at the relevant Department for Business, Innovation and Skills guidance that had been issued specifically for this purpose, the university picked the phone up and decided to basically contact Special Branch. Special Branch say this is way beyond our pay grade, so they contact the regional, newly created regional counterterrorism units called the West Midlands Counterterrorism Unit. So they march onto campus with 26 police officers, execute 2 arrests, myself and my co-accused Hisham Yeza, hold us in solitary confinement detention for 7 days, raid our homes, seize all sorts of absurd and unreal property and take photographs of everything, including a poster of Mahatma Gandhi that I had, saying, is this your poster and what does this kind of denote? Pacifism was the first thing that came to mind, but by this time I'd learned that the police are there to draw an adverse inference, and an adverse inference means is that everything that you say, among the lawyers amongst us, everything that you say will be used against you. So when they say to you, you do not have a right to remain silent, it's usually a good idea to be silent. So apart from the first interview where I spoke and told them absolutely everything because I didn't have legal advice and thought that the police were there to actually clear me from their inquiries, I then got legal advice and learned, actually, hang on a second, they've got it here in writing that they are here to draw an adverse inference. Now, the preamble aside, in 2011, after I was released after 7 days, of course, I took some time away from university and then instructed lawyers, a very good legal firm not too far from here, Bat Murphy Solicitors, who basically fought pro bono to help me vindicate and clear my name. And in 2011, a week and a half before we were actually scheduled to go to court, my lawyers received a letter from the Chief Constable of Nottinghamshire Police saying that we'd basically like to settle this out of court. Long story short, we have a meeting around a big round table, everyone wearing suits, and what the police say is we'll pay you £20,000 compensation. We apologise for an unlawful stop and search under section 43 which requires reasonable suspicion, and we will also remove and delete the incorrect intelligence entries that we have on your system and that are constantly causing you to be stopped and searched whilst you're outside your home having a cheeky smoke at night, or you're walking down the street, or you're driving somewhere, or whatever it is, right? So this was the settlement. In 2011, a historic precedent had been set where a young Muslim brown man had essentially been wrongfully arrested and detained and interrogated, but then basically fought the system back and achieved some kind of vindication through the system as it stands. But then it wasn't the end of that, because throughout all the time that I was collecting my research data for my PhD, which was actually on counter-terrorism, I started learning a lot about this. And a lot of police officers and a lot of people who are kind of involved in counter-terrorism and PREVENT, they all turn around to me and say that, Rizwaan, you must be extremely happy now that we have PREVENT, and for that reason, people won't be wrongly detained or investigated or interrogated. And they genuinely mean this. A lot of the times you stop and think, are they actually stupid enough to believe this, or do they actually believe this? Are they pretending, or do they really believe it? And often, you realize that they actually believe this with some conviction. So that the classic argument I get is Nottingham 2 won't happen again. And the reason it won't happen again is, don't fall asleep, leave that, the reason it won't happen again is because we now have PREVENT. And PREVENT is ensuring that people are not arrested. Okay, so can I just have a show of hands? I'm sorry to make this like a class, but how many people are aware of what the counterterrorism strategy is? Contest. 1. Okay, about 10. Right, contest is the government's official counterterrorism strategy. It's got 4 strands, right? Pursue is where they undertake arrests and they conduct intelligence operations, right? And they will use the criminal justice system in order to basically incapacitate suspected and real terrorists. PREVENT. Oh, did she? All right, okay. So PREVENT, they say, is not about arrest. So thanks, Des. So what they'll basically say is that PREVENT is not about arrest, so you don't need to basically worry. Now, the problem with PREVENT is that when you're arrested, as I was, you know you're being subjected to some kind of force. It's visible power. You know when somebody's detaining you and putting you into cuffs or putting you in a cell and confining you to a space. You know that it's visible, but PREVENT is invisible. And what I mean by that it's invisible, is that it's basically been institutionalized. It's been placed into the safeguarding agenda that Malia already mentioned about vulnerability and mental health and drug abuse, for example. So often when you speak to a police officer or a PREVENT practitioner, they say, hey, look, this isn't about counterterrorism or about politics, this is about protecting vulnerable people in the same way that we are trying to protect them from drug abuse, basically. But my argument is that this is an entirely political agenda. It's got nothing to do with health issues, so stop trying to basically pathologize it and incorporate it and base it into a system that is basically not subject to the same rigor and accountability that political issues should well be. The impact of the strategy is even more perverse. So Rahman mentioned quite eloquently how when he's walking down the street, they won't talk about particular issues, or his friend is afraid to even come to a public lecture like this. I think this sums up the problem very well. And the reason is that when you are constantly under the fear or the threat that you are constantly being watched, what you essentially do is you self-discipline your behavior. You close off your behavior. You, instead of actually coming out into an open space to talk about what you are feeling openly and without fear of some kind of reprisal, you close off and you draw inward. This is a recipe, academic research shows. Authoritarian policy leads to an increased likelihood of political violence because people feel like that they cannot bring about a change through the system as it currently stands, and they have to therefore become involved in some kind of direct militancy or some kind of activity or actions. So in this sense, PREVENT is actually more insidious and more dangerous than pursue, the whole policy of actually being arrested and detained. And the reason is because it's bureaucratized, to plagiarize Weber, but it's also invisible in terms of its actual effects and impact. So unless someone admits to you that they are afraid, there is no way to empirically, sorry to be a bit of an abstract empiricist here, but there is no way to empirically, scientifically measure that. So for that reason, if you can't measure it, then it doesn't exist. And this is precisely the problem that we have. How do you then ensure that people who are afraid and have closed off are given a voice and given a space in order to articulate themselves. Now, 30 seconds on this. Some say that we can train our way into making sure that prevent works. So it's about making sure that Jim and Giles are very equipped in their everyday roles to know the kind of behaviours that constitute future terrorism. And this is precisely the point. We're now in the terrain of Minority Report and Tom Cruise, right? But I can tell you now, they haven't got the sophistication of Tom Cruise. And if you have a look at some of the case studies that have arisen up until date, it reminds me of one, Mohammed Amir Farouk at the University of Staffordshire, the unnamed student at the University of East Anglia, who actually was referred to the Prevent programme and interrogated by Special Branch. And you know why? Because he accessed Blackboard and had a look at an extract of the Dabiq magazine, ISIS's magazine, that his lecturer had put there for all students to look at for their coursework. So this is the absurdity of the actual Prevent programme. In practice, in reality, the consequences of it are extremely problematic. And also, how does an individual kind of base their decisions and their actions when they are trying to investigate whether someone is going to become a future terrorist? The Prevent strategy specifically stipulates that religious clothing or the taking up of a beard when you are brown means that you are a potential radical or you are a potential terrorist. Of course, when you're white, it means you're becoming a hipster. Well, let's not talk about that, because this is the racialized logic to it, that when a brown person does something, it's obviously being looked at through a lens or a racist gaze, basically. And I think on the ground, this is the problem that most people are having, that they are afraid of actually becoming involved in this, and at the same time, they're under a lot of pressure. So the key question is, what do we have to do? And seeing that my time is up now, I'm going to basically say this. Look,